Oh no, we're being recorded.
Oh, you are being recorded. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our amazing discussion. I'm super excited tonight to have Dr. Dulin and Michelle with us. They are going to be discussing all fun things methylation, specifically tied to their book called Methylation Madness. So if you do have questions afterwards, you know the drill. You can submit them to me, and then I will make sure that they get answered. I know we do have one on tonight. Katie is joining us from Tennessee. So I'm just going to kind of turn it over to you. Why don't you guys just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you two met, and then how I read your book, but how you got into
Thank you.
what you're doing. Yeah.
Want me to start or you go?
I've been doing this day one.
Day one. Came out of the womb loving biochemistry is what you're saying.
Well, actually, I have pseudo-Parkinsonian syndrome from a medication given to me as a kid.
Okay.
Destroyed my nervous system, did a number on everything. And that's how I got into the biochemistry of looking at things. And that's where it started. I ended up with a lunatic doctor who decided to give me B complex by the bucket to try and compensate for the medication. And it helped. And that's basically where I started. My background goes to my undergrad's chem, my DC is my doctorate, my postdoctorate goes into orthomolecular medicine, functional medicine, and then basically a diplomate in clinical nutrition, and pretty much that, and a subway token gets you a ride.
That's me, the best patient ever.
So good. Carrie joined us too. So Carrie,
hi, how are you?
Hi.
Carrie's a naturopath, a doctor of naturopath out in Arizona, and then we have Katie, who is piping in from Tennessee. She's a nurse practitioner. So Michelle, enter Michelle into the scene.
So I entered Dr. Dulin's world 35, 36 years ago.
In the 90s.
Yeah. 90. I was graduating.
93.
Was it 93? Yeah, it was 93. Okay. I was just a young woman. And I was a young woman who was on the verge of probably checking myself into a mental hospital because I had severe anxiety, panic disorder, OCD, depression on and off, anger jags,
sleep cycle problems.
Yeah, I couldn't sleep. I was pretty much a disaster. And I found Doc, and he basically took what was the name of the test back then?
Well, back then we were doing amino acid neurotransmitter scans.
Yeah.
We were actually running the amino acids back at that time. And we were running them a little different. We were using Dr. Old George up in upstate New York, who's gone now, but he was running neurotransmitters and things at a much tighter range in a much more specific way than they do it today. It wasn't tilt table stuff. It was down to the ranges where 0.5 to 2 points. That was the whole range. So we were picking them off of the platelets, and we were looking at all of that portion of it. So we were doing neuros, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, metanephrine, normetanephrine, plus a full 25 count on all the amino acids. And we would run them regularly and look at all of those, combining it with your standard CMPs and all of that stuff. So from there, we kind of identified out, this is before the genetics, before anything, she had an overloaded methylation cycle because the methionine was too high, the cysteine was too low. And we were running basically the adrenaline level and the metanephrine were running through the roof, and the normetanephrine and the norepinephrine were not. Mm-hmm. So it showed that she was hypermethylating through the PUMT enzyme, and it was overfiring all over the place, which in the case of hypermethylators is one of the major side effects of hypermethylation is you overactivate PUMT and you get a norepinephrine to epinephrine shift through the roof. And then if you've got any COMTs on top of it, you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's me.
Yeah.
So what would you say, because we're going to kind of just jump right in here. Most people have heard of MTHFR. now it's starting to hear about COMT, but might not really like fully understand, its impact. With most of our practitioners, I think we've got a split. We have some that just like they're on the health coaching side and they don't really go there. And then we have my friends who are on the call with me who are like biochem nerds alongside me that are like,
I'm not a nerd, not a nerd.
Oh,
He is.
No, and I'm not a nerd
No,
when it
you're
comes
not.
to biochemistry. But I do labs, and I do not understand the whole methylation issue. So that's why I'm here. I want to learn.
Awesome. I love that. So because there's this simplicity in the complexity, we'll just call it that.
Dichotomy.
Well, very much so. Like for Carrie, like how does MTHFR mutation, and there's not just one, there's like, we're still discovering them all, right?
Well, there's 60 to 70 of them that are tested for right now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Wow.
We're only discussing 2 because only 2 have actually been studied enough for a researcher to publish a paper. Whenever you read genetics, the first thing you have to realize is how it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not done from the standpoint of looking it up any place. It's done because a researcher does a study, puts it out there, and that becomes the standard for that particular gene. Case in point, there was a lovely researcher back in the day who decided that the TPH gene, TPH1, was the thing that they were going to look at for tryptophan to serotonin. And they were looking at it in Hispanics who were heroin addicted. So for the longest time, TPH1 was about Hispanics and heroin addiction instead of the fact that it was a tryptophan to serotonin pathway. So a lot of the times what you're getting in the genetics is you're getting not really information about what's going on. You're getting somebody's research, and that's it. And that's how they have to be looked at and approached. Otherwise, you don't know what you're doing with genetics.
Right. That's right. Was that Stephen Craig?
I don't remember who that was.
Is that in the 90s? Well, maybe. I don't know.
It's all come out that they all do stuff. The MTHFR is another one. The only research that's out there is basically on the utilization of that with folic acid and genetic defects in babies. But that has nothing to do with people who are not babies.
Right. Well,
Wow.
and much of it like focuses on the undermethylation, and hypermethylation is rarely discussed. How do you define it? How do you define hypermethylation, and what are some common symptoms?
Hypermethylation is really a very tough term to use. When you look at the methylation cycle, methionine picks up ATP with the MAT1A gene, becomes S-adenosyl methionine. S-adenosyl methionine is your main methyl donor for hundreds of methylation reactions. Now, depending on what those downwind methylation reactions are, is where you get hypermethylation or not. Once that occurs, it then becomes S-adenosyl homocysteine, which then becomes homocysteine. Then the homocysteine is either going to recycle itself back up into methionine via the MTHFR or the BHMT gene, or it's going to turn around and become cysteine through cystathionine in the CBS gene and CTH. So the bifurcation there tells you whether that cycle of methylation is going to keep going in a circle or whether it's going to come out and go into other directions the way that it should. Most cases of hypermethylation are related to CBS and CTH malfunctions more than anything else, or they're related to different COMTs, GNMTs, GATMs, any of those downwind methylation pieces. So where do the side effects come from? Side effects don't come from MTHFR. Side effects come from the COMT, the POMT, the your GNMT, all of those genes. Those are the ones that create symptoms because they're what the methylation is affecting. If you keep that methylation cycle turning in a circle, it's going to keep firing those methylation pathways that are functional. If you have one or two that are jammed, then that's going to back up the system. It's going to flip to something else, and you're going to get new symptoms. You can get anxiety or you can get terrible anger flashes if you've got an MTHFR pumping more stuff in, okay, as opposed to shutting it down. And everybody forgets the main thing. MTHFR is just a recycle point. Methionine coming in from the diet is the main way you're going to get your methylation sequences to fire. And nobody's looking at the dietary factors of whether or not methionine should be brought in or not. If you give somebody a high methylating diet, you're giving them a high methylation from methionine coming in. If you're eating tons of methionine foods, I don't care how much MTHFR problems or anything you've got, you're going to over-methylate simply because you're eating that diet. Which is why all Orientals who eat a high methylating diet have yellow skin.
Because
I just throw that one out there. That's why they do.
Yeah. And my diet prior to, throughout my childhood, I'm German and Italian. And my mother always cooked dinner perfectly and, always had the...
Put your hand up. You notice? If you can see it. Her hand is yellowish. Okay.
And if I spread my hand, I have
yellowish.
See, like
because
here?
She has a higher methylation sequence always going on, which increases,
here. Wait, just take this
yellow
folder.
Which increases. Unfortunately, when you have high methylation, it increases the breakdown in the liver and spleen of the red blood cells. Since methylation is one of the major ways that pushes the bilirubin up. And the reds, you're going to get a bilirubin jump there, and that's going to give you the yellow tone to the skin that always shows up in hypermethylation.
Yeah. And
so what are the foods for that would cause that? Because I actually was just talking to someone earlier that is a buyer at a store, and she's yellow right now, is what she said, and she's going for an ultrasound tomorrow to see if she's congested. But if it's a diet thing, if I can give her that, like, hey, let's cut back on these things.
So she should, methionine and sulfur foods are fish and endive and all leafy greens.
Well, not all, but most.
Well, most leafy greens.
You'd be looking at fish, rice, peppers, onions,
garlic.
You'd be looking at garlic. You'd be looking at oranges, grapes, grapefruits, raisins, celery, peas. Just a few of them off the top of the head.
Yeah. So
those are all high methylation foods because they have a higher percentage of methionine in them.
So I stay away from those. I can't eat them. We did an experiment because my bilirubin was running on the norm between like 7 and 8 for decades. And then it just sort of went down a little bit. So, and I was very
tired.
I was tired, and I am not a tired person. I go, but we had to do an experiment. So he gave me an orange 2 years ago.
She was moaning and yelling at me that her diet was too restrictive and she wanted to try an orange. And I said to her, sure, go ahead, try an orange. But so she recorded it, and within how long?
Probably 2 days. I was bedridden for a week with pain in my legs and my buttocks that was so excruciating that I almost threw a glass across my kitchen because the pain was this astronomical. So I just tensed up. My adrenaline fired so high, and I just tensed up, and I can't metabolize that sulfur out. And
she has a COMT issue that's suppressed. It's a downregulated COMT, but she has a normal functioning PUMT. So the norepinephrine to epinephrine shift goes crazy whenever her methylation sequence gets too hot. The COMT can't get rid of the methylation correctly, and it can't break down the neurotransmitters correctly. COMT is also responsible, besides detoxing, it's responsible for the breakdown of dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, serotonin, all of those. So if the COMT is running slow, then all of those can't come out. It plugs up the receptors and jams it. Now, if you've got an MAO problem on top of it, like somebody does, then you can't get rid of the neurotransmitters. They plug up all the receptors, and now the nerves go into spasm and shut down. And that will cause chronic muscle spasms from the adrenaline being in the system way too long.
That's me.
I did not realize, I thought oranges were more of a mild methylation.
Right, but you got to remember something.
Not for me.
It matters on how you look at food. Now, if you look at food as just how much is in it, what the gram value is, then that doesn't tell you anything. You have to look at the percentage of the amino acid to the protein. Then you know if it's a high methylator or a low methylator. High methylating foods are up around 3-4%. Tuna fish is 4.55% methionine as part of that amino acid sequence. So when you look at the protein level, the protein, that percentage gives you the idea whether it's a high methionine food or a low methionine food. The same thing happens with histidine and histamines. Everybody looks at how many grams there are, but that's not really it. The absorption of each amino acid set modulates itself as it's going through the gut. So you're going to get a certain percentage of each one. There's lots of research that were done on rats. If you push a rat diet up to over 4% methionine, their livers die and they basically croak. So that's why you've got to be really careful of what and how you're putting in and how much. The diet has to be addressed in any methylation sequence, or you're not going to be able to turn around and you're not going to be able to clear it.
Right.
So my diet is a low methionine, low methionine.
Very low.
Yeah.
You can't have a no methionine diet because it's in every food.
Yeah.
But yours has to stay below 2%. If you compare it to human breast milk, the amount of methionine in human breast milk is 1.55%. It's very low. And it's supposed to be to promote the normal folic acid in a child. It can go up to 2% in humans if you can metabolize it as an adult. If you can't, then it starts to back up. The more it backs up, the worse that affects the entire system.
Right.
So like I can eat broccoli, I can eat cauliflower.
Can't eat garlic.
Can't go near garlic. Actually, well, back in the day before my liver failure. So I went into acute liver failure 11 years ago. I had a urinary tract infection and the doctor gave me macrobid. And I asked if it was
it wasn't a sulfur, but what it did was it shuts down methylation. That's one of the ways macrobid works.
Yeah.
And she already had a problem with that. So, yeah.
It put me within 4 days. I was in acute liver failure. My enzymes, you remember the numbers better than me.
Well, they were up around 1,500.
Yeah, my AST and ALTs way, way high. My
bilirubin was at 20.
Yeah.
Oh, crap.
Yeah.
So the liver doctor, they all thought she should be dead.
Yeah. I went into my favorite story. At one point, I also have hyperthyroid. So my hair started to fall out in my liver failure. And during my liver failure, so doc told me to go to my endo and my thyroid endo. So I walk in the office and I handed him my blood tests, and he was just like stunned that I was even walking, which I hardly was. I was barely making it. And
it took a long time to get her back.
Yeah. And then blah, blah, blah. Some time went by and I was like, I think now I'm getting like heart palps because I was getting better. The bilirubin was slowly going down, blah, blah, blah. So I go back to him. It was like the guy saw a ghost. He looks at me and he's like, Miss Anglisano?
You're still alive?
Still alive. It was actually really funny, but I mean, I went to, prior to the liver specialist that I found, she's phenomenal. I went to another doctor, another liver endo, and he wanted to do liver biopsies on me and all kinds of stuff. And
he just said she had hepatitis C. He put it under a chemical hepatitis C, and he didn't want to hear anything else.
Yeah, and I refused it because he was like, no way.
See, her liver failed more than likely because she has an MAOA suppression and a COMT suppression and a CBS, CTH, problem with an MTHFR.
Yeah, so your poor little cycle has no chance.
Yeah. And he actually, so this doctor, he wanted to do all these tests on me, and doc said absolutely not, because he knew what was going on. And
we knew it was the macrobid. She should have never had the macrobid. It was,
his words were, "They're killing you with macrobid." So this doctor ends up writing me a letter and mailing it. But before that, he called me on the phone and was yelling at me, telling me, I don't listen to him, I'm going to die. Yeah. And so then he ended up, and I was like, he called him a quack, and I was just like, holy cow. So I hung up on him, and then I got a letter in the mail saying that I'm not following his protocol and blah, 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 and I will be dead. I'm not.
I would like walk right back in there.
I have a question.
I would love to, I want to
send him a copy of
I
the
want
book.
to send him a copy of the book, because I mean, Doc first started treating me with serine when I had the liver failure, when I was in liver failure. And that was
the way we treated her was we used a combination of a number of different things. We used the amino acid L-serine. L-serine functions with glycine to help stabilize the acetyldenyl methionine down to basically acetyldenyl homocysteine. But serine also combines with vitamin B6, the CBS gene, to pull homocysteine down through the cysteine pathway into cystathionine down into glutathione and pull it out of the system. It's one of my favorite things for hypermethylators is L-serine.
I love
which
it.
is loaded in coconut. And you give coconut by the bucket.
Yeah.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
I had a question. So for, a lot of clients don't even know that they have MTHFR, CONT, you name it. So a client comes in and they have a UTI, and I'm speaking from conventional side here, and you prescribe a macrobid, they don't know if they have MTHFR or CONT. So as a prescriber who doesn't, and conventional providers, I'm integrative, so I understand this, but conventional providers don't even deep dive into MTHFR or CONT. So how do you get around that?
Well, the way you would look at it, if you're looking at a conventional blood test, if you're looking at the bilirubin levels, if the bilirubin is running above 0.9 on the scale, usually either 0 to 1.2 or 0.2 to 1.4, any one of those schedules, if it's above 0.9, it gives you an idea that they're hypermethylating already because they're producing more bilirubin from the breakdown of the red blood cells in the liver and spleen. You're going to get that shift between the hemoglobin into biliverdin and bilirubin. So if you're looking at them and you want to be a little bit safer on what you're giving, you look at that bilirubin level and see if it's high. If it's high, I'd stay away from all the sulfur pathways and all the methylation pathways as much as you can.
But what primary care doctor draws a bilirubin when a client comes in with a UTI chief complaint?
None.
Exactly.
Well, he knew I had a sulfur issue.
Yeah.
He did. It was on my chart.
That I get, but I'm saying we don't have that clinical data. I don't have a bilirubin to look at. I mean, now I know I can draw that, but doctors don't do that. They don't draw bilirubins for a UTI chief complaint, right? Because insurance isn't going to cover it.
Well, they don't cover any. They don't look at any of the blood work for any kind of urinary tract infection. They're still going off the symptomatology.
Well, I mean, they do a urine culture and send it for your analysis.
Yeah, but that's just basically to see a bacteria with the sensitivities. That's
Correct.
all that is. We run those all the time. That's not going to give you any information. But if you can't, you're looking at a patient. If you know you've seen that patient before, you should have at least one comp on them to see where the bilirubin is.
Yeah. No, I have CMPs in all my clients, but I'm just saying in general.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact that that's not something that providers are evaluating when somebody comes in with those symptoms.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it was in red, sulfur.
Yeah.
In her case, it's a different story. We had already told him that. We had verified that. We had discussed that. Yeah. And he already knew that. The reason that she got the macrobid on the second shot was the first one that they gave her, the doctor gave her, didn't work. And she went back, and the physician's assistant turned around and gave her the macrobid.
I don't remember any of this. Like, I don't have recollection of so much of it because my body was like shutting down.
Well, you didn't have any memory of most of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's better that way.
I know. So
But
yeah,
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Most doctors are not going to run it, which is why we run into the problems that these things show up. And this is basically medicine not doing what it should to really be accurate. And I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of gaps.
Yeah. More than they know.
So I guess the question kind of comes to play is, you know, with knowing what these gaps are, and then like the end result is people come and find, and they're looking for these alternative components. What are some key drivers that we should be looking for? Like how did you identify? Oh my goodness, yes, well, of course you, Dr. Dulin, because you've been, you know, doing this a long time, but people that are in this, you know, kind of like new state, like Carrie, like how would you help Carrie identify?
Before you do anything on any patient, you should always run a complete blood workup and look at everything.
And when you say complete, like how complete?
My question, what's complete?
For me, what I normally run is a CBC with a diff. I'll run a CMP, a full one. I'll run a lipid panel. Okay. I'll run a thyroid with a T3, T4, and a TSH. I'll run generally a homocysteine. That's most of the ones I think I normally run. Yeah, that's the start for me.
I was going to say that's
pretty basic.
Yeah.
You got to see what you got to start off, and you got to get an idea of a patient's physiology before you do anything.
Yeah. Katie, what do you typically run, Katie?
I run a CBC with diff, a CP, a lipid panel, homocysteine, B12 folate, iron studies, ferritin. If there's inflammation, I'll draw uric acid, quantitative CRP.
I always run a uric acid. Yeah.
Sometimes I'll draw immunoglobulins depending on presentation. Hormones, if we have to go there. Vitamin D. I think that's about it. Full thyroid panel, reverse T3, free T3, free T4, thyroid antibodies.
And do you do 125 and
stored,
stored and
both.
active?
Yep.
What about you, Carrie? What are you looking at?
CBC, I just, because I'm newer to labs completely, I mean, it's just not the longest time. I would have people bringing me labs and I'm like, this tells me nothing. I didn't know what they were getting done. And now I know it was because there was nothing that was being done that was of value. You know, like we're doing TSH, T3 and T4, but there's no reverse, there's no TPO, any of that kind of stuff. So I now with my clients, I always do CBC with Jeff, full thyroid panel. I do a lot with allergies too, because I'm finding more people are having allergy issues and they're just not recognizing it. And then depending on the person as to what they're dealing with, I'll do toxins, oat, and viral, because most of the people that I deal with are just really tired and, they have really bad habits and they don't want to change them. So if I at least have a precursor lab to say, hey, you have these things, now we do another lab. If it gets much worse when it comes to toxins, I'm like, yeah, this is great. It's circulating. We're getting these suckers out. And then we move forward. But the whole methylation thing is new to me. You're speaking in little bits and pieces that I understand. It's so funny. Sarah in the Krebs cycle, it's her favorite thing in the faces earth. And I'm like, okay, I get little bits and pieces of what you were talking about with that. She even knows the page in the textbook and what the textbook looks like.
So y'all, I've met my cohort in crime. He has basically a wallpaper of a genetic pathway cycling. And I'm like, I want to come in and just like stare. It would be great.
It's amazing.
Yes.
He just keeps, they don't know
adding
what
to
we're
it.
talking about.
I know. You got to show them. This is kind of great.
But see, I love that you guys do this thing because this isn't where my comfort zone is, but I do have you as resources. I'm looking at that. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That's
But
so
that's why I don't
beautiful.
have to know all of it. I can pull my friends and say, hey, I need some assistance with this. Where are we going? I do a lot of muscle response testing too. And bioresonance, when it comes to, that whole Krebs cycle and getting started, I find that we can't get past enough water. It's like people will test for needing glucose, and I'm like, well, let's take a step back. How much water do you have? Because if they don't have enough water, then their body's needing more glucose for the brain, and that's never going to get fulfilled if you don't have enough water. So I'm starting with square one with water for most people. Some people we're working on the glucose. Some people go past that to minerals, but it's rare that I even have people going to minerals. It's the water that's the harder part.
Total protein levels in the COMT in the comp. The total protein will give you an idea of how much water is in the bloodstream.
Well, I can muscle test them. I don't need a lab test.
Yeah, but this gives them something they can see.
Yeah.
And then it's more impressive for them to see it on a piece of paper as you're saying it. From the muscle testing, you've got a double verification.
Yes, and that's why I started doing labs, is because I had these people. Plus, now I work remotely with people as opposed to having everybody in person. And I can still remote muscle test, but that's a greater leap of faith than having someone's arm go weak when I do something. So doing the labs is something I need to know more of, and that's why I'm listening to you guys. I'll figure it out later on. I'm a conceptual thinker, so I'm like, okay, I'm grabbing bits and pieces. I'm all good. I will listen to it again. And I'll figure out more.
You'll sew it together later.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's kind of how my brain works. It's not like I get it all at once. I'll get these little bits and pieces, then I'll have this revelation. I'm like, oh my gosh.
So I've had a burning question that I've been chewing on for a little bit of just as sewing things together as, things kind of start, you go down rabbit holes and then all this stuff happens inside the cell, right? Like all of these mechanics are happening inside of the cell. But what I think we're going to see more of is this cellular membrane because of the lipid layer being so compromised, where it gets rigid and hard due to the toxin burden that we're like, how can we help people understand, or even us, if you start to go down into this genomics world, the health of the membrane has to play a huge part. So if you can't assimilate or get even nutrients that are in, like what is how does that play into this whole genetic story?
That's on you, pal.
What you're talking about there, you have to be looking at how the membranes are functionally manufactured and the receptors that are in them.
Right.
Receptors become more of the important piece. The problem you have getting that far down into the genetics is you can't affect it directly with nutrition.
Okay, see?
It would require a medication to affect an HTP2RA. Okay, mm-hmm. It would require a medication to get down there and actually affect those membranes and the sodium gates and pieces. What you can do when you're looking at genetics, when I look at genetics, I use a company called Genome It All. They do about 700,000 SNPs. And I'm going to look through most of it. I'm going to pull out the stuff that's related directly to the chemistry I'm looking at and directly related to the nutritional aspects that can control that. For instance, if you have an underregulated, a downregulated MAO, you know that that's going to be a vitamin B2. You know that that's going to be related to the R5P. And you're going to be using that to increase that to maximize the amount that the enzyme can actually function. If you've got a downregulated MAO, it can go all the way down to 25%. So now anything that affects that is going to drop to 25%, even lower. The max that it's going to use is 25%. So what you've got to do is keep it at 25%. And the only way to do that would be to use a supplement that's going to increase that function. And of course, that's going to affect your Krebs cycle because of all of your FADs. So you have to look at what is actually going on with that, and you have to look at the genetics that are related to that. which is hard.
Yeah. So since not all of us have Dr. Dulin's brain,
And
right? Well, I mean, I think when we have this insatiable appetite to learn and try and process and weave and sew and like, what, like from a food perspective, like a lot of us are in this, basic foundational of getting people to just, let's just choose food and not pretend food or wannabe food or things like that.
Which is the first step.
Right, which is the first step. So, and then, and then they still need us. So great. That's awesome. This, job security wise, because food is medicine. So how do we help them, understand that? So for us on the other end of this, what is a great resource to be able to know that, what types of foods without becoming a dietitian, because that's not what we're not doing medical nutrition therapy, but it's from how do we help our clients from this very resource, foundational component of here's where we start. And then if we want to dig a little further from that perspective, what resource would you recommend?
The problem is there isn't any resources for it.
I know. See, you answered the question.
Everybody, when they do the dietitians, and I used to have tons of registered dietitians who worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
The problem comes down to with the dietitians is that they're more for a very specific type of medical treatment.
Correct.
They're not for generalized nutrition.
Correct. I would agree with that.
They don't come into the conversation of regular stuff. Theirs is pretty much very localized in one segment only.
Right.
Okay. You're either dealing with a kidney function problem where you're trying to salvage the receptors there, or you've got a heart problem where you're trying to stop the deposition of fat. Those are different stories than what everybody's looking at here.
Correct.
What you're looking at here is the basic components of what's in the food and what the basic components of that food will do to a person.
Mm-hmm.
Why should an orange, which has virtually no protein in it at all, cause such a big reaction to a hypermethylator?
Right.
It's because the percentage of the methionine is high. So it reacts that way in the body. Because when the body absorbs food, you have to go back to that basic component of when it's absorbing food. What is it absorbing? And what is it utilizing? And what does each food give?
Right.
If you eat a food set that combines together and has a lot of serine and it has a lot of methionine, that'll cancel each other out. Okay. If you eat a food that's only methionine, that's not going to cancel out and it's going to force the metabolism in one direction. So you've got to look at how to balance the foods. How do you do that? I wrote a program back in the day for that. That's how I do that. And I took the food composition tables. Back in the day, it was called Handbook Number 8 for the Department of Agriculture. And they had listed every single food and its biochemical breakdown. And you could take that and extrapolate out what the percentages of each one was, add those together, and that told you what that meal was going to look like. And you can balance meals that way.
That's going back to how the body functions and how it deals with certain foods. Prior to my liver failure, I was able to eat an onion here and there. I was able to eat garlic here and there. But due to the situation that the physical situation that
it destroyed more of your enzymes.
Yeah,
you can't detox worth a day.
Yeah, now I can't detox at all. Yeah, but it's very interesting because back when I was a kid, well, back like 24 when I first met him, let's say I was still a kid. When I first started his program, I was able to, after some time, I was able to literally feel my body change, even in just a millimeter of a difference if I were to eat something that was not on my program. If I ate a cherry or if I ate a histamine, like a pasta or something. And now my diet is the same pretty much since I started, but there's not an ounce of
the enzyme systems have gotten slower as you age. So what happens is you have less leeway to play with it.
Yeah.
Older people, as you get past the age of the initial up to 25 before the genetics completely shut down, Okay, after that, you're now going to run into the aging process, which slows all the enzymes. As those enzymes slow down, you have less and less leeway unless you're doubly balancing it off at the same time. So in other words, she could have a little bit of onion, but she'd have to eat a half a pint of coconut milk ice cream to compensate.
Now I can't. Now I can't touch it.
Right.
I can't even smell it. but the way I eat, and people see me eating all day. I'm 120 pounds. I'm 5 foot tall, but I eat. I'm a small person, but I eat tremendously, like tons and tons. I eat all day, and my friend, she's my assistant teacher. She's baffled by the amount of food I eat daily, but she's learning
because you're only eating what you can metabolize.
Yeah, and I eat biochemically. Like people will say, "Oh, what are you having for dinner tonight?" "Oh, I'm having some zucchini, and I'm going to have a piece of pork, and I'm going to have some carrots with that, and and a potato." I don't look at food as what it is, as the name of it. I look at the chemical in it,
which you have to. A lot of people will never do that.
Yeah, but
people who are looking to understand damage, understand problems, people who have issues in their system, once they understand that this block of food does not metabolize correctly, then they get the understanding that if I eat that, I'm going to pay for it, so I'm not going to eat it.
Right.
Okay. Or I'm going to eat it and I'm going to pay for it, but I know what it is, so I'm not going to freak out.
But it's also
what makes the difference.
But also, I'm so in tune with my body that I know. Like the other day at work, right? All of a sudden, my adrenaline just fired really, really high, and right away I start in the type A more than I am normally. OCD, and I start straightening up my desk, and everything's got to be this way, and then I realized, I'm like, okay, adrenaline's firing, so I'm going to eat some coconut. And I keep food, I have food with me. So I'll eat some coconut, and then I'll get like all foggy, my eyes I can't think right, and I'm like very ADHD. So I'll eat some walnuts because that's tyrosine. So within 10 minutes on a good day, when I'm not like really out, then I'll be mellowed out and I'll be balanced.
It's called balancing food by chemistry and not eating food. It's good.
And that's what I do. Like, that's literally like, okay, I'll have a little of this. Oh, that's a serine. Oh, today I wasn't too great.
You see, that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
Is they need to have a resource. And nobody put this together to have a resource to turn around and say, okay, they're having cabbage, they're having this, they're having that. What does that chemistry look like?
Yes.
That's the resource that needs to be put together for everybody to have.
Yeah.
And I would love for somebody to have the computer knowledge and not want $400 million to do it.
Oh, you and me both.
I would love it if Practice Better would do that, because it's so nice to have the clients put in their food and be able to look at macros and micros. But if we could have that for those people that
the micros don't make any, they don't make any sense.
But for certain things it does. But it would be awesome to have that information.
What I'm saying is, I understand what you're saying, and I look at the apps and things that are on, and I listen to people come in all the time and tell. Those apps do not go far enough. They're not looking at anything biochemically. They're looking at it from a standardized stats picture, because they're stats people.
Yeah.
Absorption rates are 25 to 40% on a good day out of your gut.
Right.
So if you're eating so many macros and stuff for that meal, how do you know that your absorption rate is actually doing that? Are you at 40%? You're at 25%? Is the app adjusting for your absorption and digestion? If you've had a big meal in the morning, does that mean you're at 25% for lunch? And does that adjust for that? It doesn't do any of that.
Right.
And that's the problem with statistical type of medical practice. It doesn't tell you. I was at IHS, and I think Catherine will probably know this one. I was at IHS, and Jeffrey Bland was up there, and he said, We know what percentage of people are going to get this disease. We know what percentage of people are going to benefit from our treatment. We know what percentage of people are not going to benefit from our treatment. We still don't know anything about the person sitting in front of us. That's profound.
There you go. Well, and it's not so much just absorption, but then it becomes the assimilation, because it's not what you absorb, it's what you assimilate. So that's the key part. And I think you're talking about like an amino acid profile of how, you know, the breakdown of the amino acid profile. So that's like eating biochemically is really the amino acid piece. So that's all we need to do. There's our $1 million idea. I got so many of them roll around in here. I'm going to try to retire soon, but you know, but I think like if you only eat what you can metabolize, that is a great statement that nobody knows how to define that for them, because we are all like Michelle. How many Michelles are walking around?
Right.
Well, that's, you know,
that's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
Is that everybody is a unique biochemical engine. I've never seen two genetics the same. I've never seen two blood workups the same. And I've never seen two metabolistic patterns in people, even in twins, that were the same.
Right.
That's why I don't have protocols.
Right. Yeah. And that's what gets really hard, is because I think what we're also discovering is not just the food profile or the eating metabolically, but not only do we have two people that aren't the same, your ecosystem inside of you isn't the same. So what works for you from a microbiome perspective is going to be completely different, where you have different war of bugs that's going on, that's going to shift and change enzymes. It's going to shift and change the cellular response. It's going to shift and change what you are actually assimilating based on this bug profile that's in you. And the gut is really just the access to it. We got it everywhere.
And then you got to remember that changing the diet changes the microbiome.
Right? I know.
It's an interconnection on everything that is not being looked at from an interconnected standpoint. No. That's where the problems are running in.
And this is what makes me feel so bad and crazed is, you know, on the different Facebook groups.
Oh God, don't get me started.
You know, seriously, I'll, you know, on a Sunday morning, I'm laying in bed, you know, before I do my meditation, I get up and I'm, you know, and I'm scrolling through it, and everybody's like, no, you have to eat this, you know, and I have MTHFR, and nobody knows if they're a hypermethylator or a hypomethylator. Nobody knows that. And if they do know it, they're still taking methionine, and
well, they're not addressing the diet.
Yeah, no, Terry. But when they do, I mean, Dr. Dulin, when they, they will. They'll say, oh, well, I'm eating, you know, methionine this, and I'm having fish, and have all kinds of methionine foods. And all I want to do is say, oh my God, no, stop. Because you're jamming up your system even more. And I feel so bad for these people.
They don't know what they're doing with that, because it's not MTHFR.
So how would you, so it's not just, again, we've kind of identified that in the cell, we've got this methylation cycle. It's not one little thing that influences it. It's multifactorial. So how do you help identify the difference between a hyper and a hypomethylator? So then we can, and then what food profile or amino acid profile would that, maybe that's where you start, because that's an easy search. In my opinion.
The bilirubin is helpful to look at from a blood test standpoint.
Bilirubin.
Methylation, the problem you have with methylation is, what is a hypermethylator? A hypermethylator is when the cycle from methionine to homocysteine back to methionine stays constantly firing. Okay. If it does not leave the system, and the methionine stays in that specific circle, you're going to hypermethylate. Because it's going to keep methylating over and over and over again until it runs out of ATP.
And that's when you see the excessive anxiety, all the other people.
So when I stop with that cycle, like he just explained, I'll automatically I could fire a migraine, or most easily to deal with is bad body pain. Not like when I ate the orange, but my joints hurt. and I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia prior to seeing Dr. Dulin because I had so much body pain at times. I didn't have headaches so much, but I couldn't understand, like, oh God, you just want to stretch all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened is when that stops firing, I go, I crash. And my daughter's a hypomethylator. You should see our kitchen.
Combo.
It's she's eating fish and I'm eating turkey, because I'm firing here and she's like, going in slow motion. So but she has a lot more body pain than I do, and she's
got different stuff,
and she can't
the problem
lose weight
comes down
easily.
to with you is yours with hypermethylation.
So were you evaluated for SIRS with your fibrom? Was she evaluated for SIRS with the fibromyalgia?
No,
because it was basically, we knew it was a sympathetic nervous system bounce.
Yeah,
we knew that's where it was going to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think to kind of wrap up. Oh God, this was so good. Like, what do we do now? What can we do, since we're on the other end of this, of trying to help people identify, trying to help people, with that just basic stuff.
Let me get that in an hour.
I know. Well,
I interrupted about the difference between a hypo and a hyper. I interrupted.
Yeah,
so you tell.
The problem comes down to with it is methylation chemistry is very, very different clinically than it is on paper.
Right.
Okay. Clinically, when you have a high methionine diet or you have a hypermethylation, you have to look at how their energy production is being done. One of the things, the MAT1A gene requires an ATP molecule to actually turn around and activate it to get methionine to make SAMe. That ATP molecule relates genetically to AMPD1, it relates to the ATP5C1, all of those. So if you're not producing ATP correctly, you're not going to activate methionine. It's going to spurt on and off, and you're going to get what we call a bouncing methylator. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. So you have to look at all these different pieces to methylation chemistry before you look at only one piece. Clinically, the expression of hypermethylation can be anything from massive depression. If they have an upregulated COMT, it's going to rip out all their neurotransmitters. It could be a temper problem. If they have a downregulated COMT and a higher PUMT, they're going to have anger flashes and temper and be angry all the time. So there's so many different modulations of this because it's all downwind. Okay, you have to look at what's happening downwind to know what the clinical symptomatology is going to be. In the case of the fibromyalgia piece, what you were looking at more for her was the simple fact that she has an upregulated GNMT. She's producing tons and tons of creatine phosphate, okay, which is going to increase the muscle activity like crazy, okay? That's going to cause more spasms when you throw in a hyperactive PUMT, noradrenaline to adrenaline shift. So now you're going to get these looks that are going to look like a lot of the symptomatology that you would see for different conditions, but they're not related to that condition. So when you look at each individual one, you're going to see different stuff.
We did a lecture in Vegas at the ANMA convention on the
downwind.
The downwind. So it's on my YouTube channel if you wanted to see that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How does it help? You'd have to have a lot more looks at different pieces, and you'd have to look at the simple effects of what's going on with individuals.
Right.
Each individual is going to have a downwind effect from the methylation, which is going to tell you whether they're hyper or hypo. Okay.
So I keep thinking of like the assessments that we do, or trying to get people to be so in tune with their body, like you are, Michelle. Like that is I have a saying. It's a intentional nutrition, intuitive response. So making sure that you're super intentional with your nutrition so you can intuitively understand how you are responding. So helping people identify, you know what, that food doesn't love me back. I wonder why. Love the foods that love you back. Like, let's unless you're going to do the whole, hey, I'm intentionally putting in because I know what my response is going to be and I'm okay with that. But
Yeah,
some
and a
people
lot of people
can't,
like
right?
that.
Yeah.
How many Italian people I have that come in that have allergies so bad their eosinophil counts are through the roof. They've got no parasites, but they're eating tomato sauce by the bucket every single day.
Right.
They take them off tomato sauce for a month, and all of a sudden they're feeling 10 times better. And then they go, but I'm Italian. Tomato sauce, and they get sick again. And then you're like, yeah, well.
I just said to him, you know, speaking of like tomato sauce, I made something. A friend of mine came for dinner the other night, and I made pasta, and I was like, you know what? There's some pork in it, so it kind of balances out the tyrosine to the histamine. So, and then I had a cookie, and I was like, oh, falling asleep, and then my heart's like, you know, and I know certain things that I can cheat with. Like I could cheat with a histamine because I could balance it out with a tyrosine or a serine. But, you know.
Yeah, but you're going beyond what they.
I don't do that on the often.
They need to know what the food are doing.
Yeah.
They need to know why that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that's one of the hardest parts. What you have to do is, I don't know if you can get it anymore because the government seems to have shut down access to anybody who's not an institution on the handbook number 8. Okay, so I'm not even sure you can get the food composition tables. But there are bunches of them out there. There's Wiley from England. They do a food composition tables. The World Health Organization does a food composition tables for all over the world. The handbook number 8 from the Department of Agriculture. They all have everything listed, all of the foods, and every single one, all the amino acid balance in it. If you calculate out from there the percentages, you'll know what foods look like this or that, as opposed to just containing it. Like every meat contains methionine, and meats are dense with protein, so they have higher amounts and higher grammages. So everybody goes, oh, that's got to be a high methionine food. But it's not, because beef's percentage is 2.2.
Okay, so you're talking about the actual percentage versus the mass, basically.
Right.
Okay. Okay, so last question would be real quick. Is moving from to the practitioner side, those that are wanting to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this whole fun genomics space and become Krebs cycle warriors, what would you hang out with him? I know I'm not gonna come knock on your door and hang out for a whole day and just like drool on your wallpaper you got going on over there. But what would be a good place to start? Like those that are curious, because I know I've got some people in our group that are like, okay, yeah, but what now? Like, I want to know more. What would be a good place to start that would to ease you into this, other than reading your book? Yes, I think it is.
It's not even easing into it. You'd have to get a good. I like Stepanek. Okay, the biochemistry of food. Okay, you have to look in there and start looking at the genetics. It's not something that is so simple that it's easy to see. That's the problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interconnected in so many different pieces that it becomes impossible to sit down and just do a 30-second look at genetics.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
When you really get into looking at different pieces, there's a lot of textbooks and stuff out there, and I'll send you a couple of them through Michelle. She can send you all of that, and you can take a look at those. They'll give you an idea of what the pathways are doing downwind, and they'll give you an idea of what genes are interrelated with that. But the problem with it is nobody is teaching it clinically. All the geneticists you talk to are looking for disease states, and they're looking for the genes that make a disease. Mm-hmm. Instead of, you could look at a CYP1A1, and it's related, basically, it's a cytochrome P450. It's related basically to estrogen, and it's related to caffeine. Okay? Well, when we were first growing up as little humans, back in the day, thousands of years ago, there was no caffeine in everybody's diet. There was none of these things. So what other things was this enzyme doing, and why is it there? That's not being talked about.
Right.
And that's the problem.
Right.
If you're not looking at what the baseline of what it actually is doing for the human body, you're not going to know. Those cytochrome P450s are there to basically help you digest plant compounds. which have so many varieties of different chemicals in them.
Right.
That's why they're there. But you can't get that information.
Right.
You can only say, oh, a CYP1B1, oh, that's related directly towards this medication. And that's great. But that doesn't tell you why it's there.
Right.
So you have to try and find information that relates more to what the dietary pieces are doing. That's far and few between. I like genecards.org. They're usually pretty good. They'll give you what the actual stuff is and what the pathways are, irregardless of what you're getting off of most genetics, which is going to be more of a medical skew. They're going to give you a biochemical skew. So if you're looking into just finding out what a gene's doing and you want to understand a little bit more about whether chemically it can be modified or not modified from diet, that's a good place to start. Okay. That'll give you a lot more information.
I like that. And then if like any of these, because we see this a lot too, any of these like, genomics companies like 3x4 or metagenetics or nutrigenomics, those that actually test, and then people go in, they put their stuff in StratGene or they put it in NutriHacker, and then they come to you with, hey, here's all my things. Thoughts on that?
Each company has a set of genes that they're specifically targeting.
Okay.
That's not a human being.
Yeah.
That's why I use Genome It All. The only one that I've seen that's ever better is Diamo's database that he's running out of, I think it's Rutgers now. It's one of the things in New Jersey, and he's got 1 million SNPs. Okay.
Wait, so why are they only using specific ones that they're targeting?
Because that's where each chip that they use has a specific set that it's going to look for. So when you look at 23andMe, when you look at Ancestry, when you look at all of them, they each have a V4, a V5, V2, V3 chip, and each one of those chips has a specific set of genes that it will target. Not all of them. That's where you're running into the problem with most of these companies.
Right.
They're cheating everything, and they're trying to make an entire statement about everything across the board with that when you're only looking at a small parameter.
Yeah, and when 23andMe was purchased,
he's getting something. Hold on.
No, I'm going to let you.
He's rolling across his floor.
Oh, and then 23andMe was actually purchased by Pfizer and then Glaxo, I think, and they removed a ton of SNPs. They moved like 2 or 3 of those chips, so then it was even less that they were targeting, and it doesn't give you the, the full picture.
What do you think? I think he's pulling up.
Gary.
Oh yeah.
Hold on. This would be what a Genome It All looks like. Okay.
Okay.
If you could see that.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Okay. It's 1,200 pages.
That's what he does on Saturdays.
When you're looking at this, when you're looking at how that sits in there, you're looking at 1,200 pages of different genes. Now they're scattered and they're all across the board. We can go back over there. They're scattered, okay, because they're going to break them up into different pieces. But they'll show you MAO, COMT, and they'll give you the interconnecting pieces for that, which makes it easier when you go through the whole thing and you boil it down. There's a lot of stuff in there that's ridiculous. How many Neiman Picks are you going to see when somebody's 55 years old? Right. Come on. Right. There's a lot of stuff in there that's research oriented, but that's what I like about them is that they don't short sheet it and they give you a more broad spectrum of all of the genetics.
How much is that?
$349.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's
wow.
You don't even get involved in it. You don't have to order it. All you simply do is send them to the website, genomeitall.com, and they run the whole thing through themselves. They do get the cheek swab, pay for it, and everything else. And they get sent back a PDF. And the PDF, if you look at the PDF, they can give you their interpretation, or you can look through it yourself. And when you look at it yourself, you get a whole lot more.
Yeah.
So do you think that these companies that only do the certain SNPs are the SNPs that are most likely to come back positive so that they can say, yes, you need this?
More so, these are the SNPs we think are important, and we're ignoring everything else.
Kind of like Ben Lynch's Dirty Genes, his 7 that he did, which good. I mean, it's a if you're a Joe Schmo, Jane Smith, John Doe, you know, whatever, kind of like, oh, at least creating the awareness. Like, I feel like that's at least a book that starts to create the awareness to be like, hey, I need to be digging a little deeper. That's kind of how I look at it.
Everybody throws their hat into the ring, and eventually it becomes something else. And that's going to basically be. He's a little too much marketing, a little too much money oriented, not enough in the science of it, and a little bit too much on what is populist.
Yes. Well, he and like, I remember when he first started kind of back with Amy Yasko with that whole methylation and autism kind of came on board back in 2009, 2010, something like that. That's when I started to dive into these things because it just, you know, I had
Amy's stuff was interesting.
It was.
Okay. It was a lot of really good stuff. But if you want to really look at methylation, you got to go back to the orthomolecular guys with Koonin and Abramonoff and Pauling. They were doing more of the methylation initially for the diagnosis of schizophrenia. They were trying to tie those two together.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on Embrace HR?
That's the Enlight. That's it's the same name.
Same product.
It's a great product for hypomethylators. It's a terrible product for hypermethylators.
And why?
Because it's too much. You're going to recycle the methylation back into the cycle over and over and over again on a hypermethylator. And it's going to burn down the ATP eventually. Everybody who puts in a lot of the 5-methylfolates and stuff like that, what happens initially is you're going to get a bump. You're going to get a PUMT increase from the increased methylation. They're going to get more adrenaline. They're going to feel really great. 2 to 3 months later, that's going to crash. And down they're going to go. And then they're not going to feel as good. They're not going to have the adrenaline. And they're going to basically burn down the dopamine norepinephrine sequence enough that it's going to make them stop because they're not going to feel good at all. So you got to have more than one product for all of these pieces. I like that product, and I'll probably think about using it for hypomethylation because it's.
Have you spoken to Townie?
Not yet. They haven't. No, they
haven't spoken.
Not yet.
I want to be in on that phone call.
I'm
serious.
I said the same
listening
thing.
to him and I want to be in on this conversation.
I said the same thing. I'm going to
because he's going to have a rebuttal to that.
Yeah,
I promise you.
Try. But the problem comes down to is if you're not clinical and you're not in the trenches actually using the product, you're going to have a biochemical explanation, but you're not going to have a day-to-day, this is what actually happens.
And
those
I can see that.
Different.
Which I think is where, like, you know, I had my daughter on this, and I think she's actually a hypermethylator is what I'm deducing from this. So I'm like going to go back and look at her bilirubin now.
Okay, so that I had a quote. Okay, so a bilirubin can give me 3 or 4 different differentials, right?
Yeah.
How do I know? Yeah, you're a hypermethylator.
Well, usually when you look at bilirubin, it's fairly constant on a person. Okay, it runs fairly, pretty much
stable. Yeah,
steady state.
Yeah. So when you look at that, if they're running above 0.8, 0.9, and they're on the high end of the scale, that's usually hypermethylation.
Okay.
Why? The liver, basically, liver and spleen, the methylation system is what cleaves the red blood cells. The hemoglobin leaks out, becomes the bilirubin. So that particular setup shows up in all the research as darkening spleen, darkening liver with hypermethylation. There's a couple of really interesting studies that were done on rats with that.
So would they also have issues with their red blood cells then? Like any of your MC?
Usually when you start, you usually
I was about to ask that.
Higher end.
Say that one more time.
They're on the higher end. Hypermethylators, the body's pumping out more red blood cells because they're breaking them down too quickly.
Yeah, that's what I was. That's okay. And then and then iron. Does that play into that too? Or would they be more of like a
system might not be affected? So you won't see a ferritin, you won't see an iron overload. You'll see more of the bilirubin up on the high end, a yellowish tone to the body, and you kind of notice the sympathetic nervous system's always overfiring. You get a trapezius muscle, for those who do muscle testing. The trapezius muscle, you'll get that. You'll get chronic spasms in the upper back and neck and shoulders.
Always.
You'll get energy drops in the afternoons when the sympathetic nervous system kicks over and it eats up the ATP. You'll get chronic cravings for sugar as the epinephrine overfires and suppresses the glucose. You'll get a sleep cycle disturbance. Usually during the pineal gland sleep cycle, the norepinephrine goes up to keep you asleep all night. But when you're hypermethylating, it immediately fires into adrenaline. So they usually wake up every 2 hours, 3 hours.
Unless you eat a lot of coconut milk ice cream like I do.
True.
Yeah, no, I'm totally just, so with a hypermethylator, if you start to introduce these things and their bilirubin was like at, I don't know, 0.4, and then you introduce the supplementation that is potentially throwing it into a hypermethylation because they're a hypermethylator, their bilirubin would increase like.
Usually hypermethylators will not have a very low bilirubin unless they have an energy problem on top of it.
Yeah. Okay.
If you have a low ATP production, then you're not going to activate the methylation sequences effectively. So it'll come and go in spurts. Those are the worst ones to see. You see the 0.4 at one time, and the next time you look, it's 1.4. And you're like, what happened here?
Right.
So the only way to correct the hypermethylation is through diet for the rest of their life?
Well, for the most part, yeah, unless you've got a way to get CRISPR in there.
I just hate diets.
I know.
Because it's like you have to do this for the rest of your life. And
I'll tell you what, being that I've been on his program for
is it hard?
5 years, it really, if you feel as crappy as I felt for most of from my 20s, from my childhood to my 20s when I found him, the diet it's supplements, it's meat, it's certain vegetables, and it's fruit.
Yeah, but see,
but I feel if you feel crappy enough, you'll do anything.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's also patient education.
Yeah.
You teach them, it's the easiest way to look at it is simple. You have a car, you fill it up with the same type of gas all the time. You take it on a trip, you put other gas in it, all of a sudden the car is not running the same way. It's gas, but it's a different company. So why does that happen? When people understand that the food does this or does that, and it's not just enjoyable, then they understand that this is going to cause an issue. This is going to cause me a problem. Then they have the thought in their head, they're either going to decide to say yes or they're going to decide to say no. If they say yes, they're going to suffer with it. They know what it is. At least they understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's not that a person would suffer on a diet. Like I'm on thyroid medication for the rest of my life. I could have been on anxiety medication. I could have been on depression medication. I could have been on medication for my OCD, my panic disorder, my body pain. I would have been on 10 different medications at 55 years old. But all I'm doing is I'm eating foods that
you
balance
metabolize
me out.
Well, you metabolize.
So to me, my food is my medicine.
Eventually, food is going to become an individualized piece that matches the person's genetics, their lifestyle, and everything else. You can't just look at food as one thing or another. Right. People in the equator zone where it's hot are going to have less need for protein because they don't need to produce internal body heat. People in Alaska are going to have a higher need for protein because they need to produce more body heat. So all of these things have to be eventually taken into consideration in designing what a person should and shouldn't eat. We have to get away from the thought of ethnic, this is what we eat because we're this. No, this is what we eat because human beings have their own lunch pail and we go anywhere. We eat ice cream at the North Pole, okay, and we eat hot peppers, okay, in Brazil. So, I mean, we don't follow the rules of our climate and everything else where we should follow.
And plus, when you feel as good as I do with so many different issues that I have and the symptomatology that I have, when you feel with everything that I have, I could be feeling horrendous every day. And I really have to say,
even one thing, one quick, even easier. If you're a professional athlete, you eat a specific way because it gives you the optimum performance.
Yeah. And you
that's
just feel
the
good.
mindset patients need to understand.
Right.
The optimum function.
Yes.
You feel great.
Amen. Yeah.
You know?
And that comes down to, I have this whole thing where I talk about awareness to attainment. You know, you have the awareness and then you have to accept. And then you choose the action rather than jumping from awareness directly to action, because that acceptance is going to give you the appropriate action that requires that accountability and assessment and that constant check to then hit the attainment. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that has to be a part of it.
Yeah.
If it's not part of it, then it's not going anywhere.
I just lucked out in my lifetime to have found him. And then I was so sick emotionally, mentally, and physically.
You were dying.
Yeah.
There's a difference. When you're dying, it
changes
your mindset.
Before my liver failure, when I was in my 20s, when I first found you, I was a lunatic. Like, my brain was just not functioning. And because I started feeling better after 3 months, I started feeling a difference. I just became like a fly on his wall. You know, I'm calling the office constantly. I'm making appointments, and I'm just sitting there listening and notes and notes and notes.
How many times can you ask about peas?
I know, it's like, can't eat them, but you know, it's, you know.
Well, I think this was really like enlightening in the sense that it's not just a one size fits all. Food is medicine, and helping people kind of like in that, where do they fit and where do they belong? They have to become in tune and become aware of these other components. It's not just MTHFR. It's not just COMT. It can be a conglomerate of things. So I really appreciate y'all making the time. And
thank you for reaching out to me. That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to get you two connected to Townie and Diane. I think it would be a really great conversation to have, because there's a lot of nuance to this, but also I still feel like there is that, you mentioned patient education. And I think the accumulation of information is one thing, but the implementation is where we can be of really great value and resource of helping people take all of that. Okay, now what? Now, what do we do with this, and how? And what's the how? And when you do feel as bad as you feel, you will kind of do whatever.
Until you feel better, then you do whatever you want again.
No, but then you're too scared to, because then you're going to feel like crap again.
Only if you understand. That's where patient education, what you're saying with the patient education, is so important for them to understand what they're doing.
Well, that's honestly, quickly, I know we're running late. That's why I wanted to write the book, was because I just wanted people to understand, like, it's not a one size fits all, and there is a way to feel better. You know.
Yep, I appreciate that.
I say it every day. Not a one size fits all.
Right. Well, so what Katie is doing, so she's a nurse practitioner, and you know, we got to think about the time, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we created this network, was for this zone of collaboration to do. So she does the initial assessments, does a diagnostician, you know, kind of does these pieces, and then hands it off to Stephanie, who is a PhD in functional medicine candidate, and she walks them through this whole. In fact, we call her an implementation specialist, and walks her through, like, with that patient education, and here's the intro, this is how you do it. And they're both getting paid. We just explain it. I'm all about systems and processes. Katie will tell you that. Like, if we don't have a system and we don't have a process, the patient experience is really the key factor. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as they feel like they are part of the process to be able to have that empowerment, which has been missing in medicine this whole time.
Forever.
So awesome. Well, thank you guys.
Gotten terrible.
It has. But we're offering, we got other solutions.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely.
Right?
If you want to invite us back and talk about other stuff, we can. Absolutely. I noticed she had mentioned about allergies, and I don't think she ever looked into the HNMT, which is histamine methylation component.
It's a whole nother.
That talks about allergy and methylation at the same time.
I hate allergy testing.
I do too.
Ugh, I hate it.
It comes back negative 90% of the
Yep.
time.
Yep.
Or,
Yep.
or it comes back positive from a fact that they're all completely inflamed and they're going to light up like a Christmas tree no matter
Christmas tree.
what.
Yep.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Hey,
we're on the
Sarah,
same
will
page.
you get the genetics lab that he uses?
Yes.
And perfect. Thank you.
Sure will.
Thank
Awesome.
you guys very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Enjoy.